Hey guys, hi, welcome back to Thoovi's channel, and today we are going to learn how to paint this beautiful thunderstorm using watercolors. So come, let's get started. Before we begin, let me give you a quick overview about the supplies that we are going to need. First is the paper. Here I am using a sketchbook. On the right side I am going to paint a final painting, while on the left side I'll be demonstrating you the techniques. The paper that is used in the sketchbook is from Fabriano's Artistico grade, which is a professional watercolor paper. You can see the paper has a texture to it, so it is a cold pressed 100% cotton, and the thickness of the paper is 300 GSM. The next supply is your paints. The paints that I'm using here today is from Thoovi Arts. I'm going to squeeze them out one by one in my palette. As I squeeze the paints out on my palette, you can already see how creamy and juicy they look. This is because Thoovi Arts are producing this premium artist grade paints, which contains along with the pigment a binder and a moisturizing agent. This moisturizing agent helps to keep your paint moist for a prolonged period of time. Even if you have squeezed them out on palette and keep them for a week or so, they still remain the same without developing the cracks or the small tiny granular pieces which happens when the paint gets dried. You can easily reactivate them whenever you want just by spraying water or adding some water into these paints. Once you are done squeezing the paints out of the tubes, the next step is to mist them using a spray bottle or just by adding water to your paints and reactivating them. Before we begin, I'll be swatching out my colors. First, I'm swatching my yellow, followed by red. The red that here I'm using is an orangish red. This orangish red is a warm red. Now, in your color palette, if you do not have this kind of red, what I would suggest you is to mix little bit of your warm yellow into your red and try and see to obtain a similar kind of color mix. The next combination that I have made is with my red, yellow and little bit of bright rose. Instead of bright rose, you can also go for little bit of alizarin crimson or any other crimson shade that you might have. The next shade was my bright rose, followed by purple. So you can create your own purple by mixing any crimson shade with your blues, right? So you could mix your own purple. Then comes my indigo, and the last is sap green. This sap green color you could obtain by mixing your lemon yellow along with any darker shade of green, and you would have this beautiful yellowish green, also known as sap green. Now that we are done with our colors, let's move on to our next supply, which is our brushes. The brush that I am going to use here mostly is this mop brush, which is from Silver Atelier series. The next is size number 6 round brush, again from Silver Black Velvet. Size number 4 Silver Silk series. I love this brush. And then comes my liner or rigger brush from Princeton Heritage. Apart from this basic necessary supplies, you might also need some miscellaneous supplies for sketching, such as a scale, pencil and an eraser, and last but not the least, masking tape. I'm using this masking tape to tape down my paper on all 4 sides. Once done, now let's move to the technique section. Here I'll be demonstrating you the wet on wet technique. Wet on wet technique essentially means layering your wet paint over your wet paper surface. Here I am layering uniform layer of clean water onto the area where I'm going to paint the sky. Ensure that you do this step properly, and if necessary, go over the areas again and again with your wet brush. but also make sure that there is no water or puddling or standing in any corners of the paper, right? Now I am going to start layering my colors. First I am starting with opera pink. The intense tone I have layered right at the baseline of the horizon line, and as I am moving upwards the intensity of this color is reducing. I have gone with dark to light approach over here. Next step is to load my brush with the coral orange shade that we have created. I have gone with a medium tonal value of coral orange, and you can see I am trying to blend these two colors together, coral orange to this opera pink, so that the transition of these colors are smooth. Now with the same lighter tonal value of my coral orange, I am going to go ahead and use the tip of my size number 6 brush and create the shape of clouds. My paper is still shining, which indicates that it is still wet. If you feel that your paper at this point has dried out, then I would suggest you to go and wet out the top areas of the sky before you go ahead with this step. I have started adding this purple shade in slanted strokes, as you can see, and once I am done, I have left in between that white gap where I am going to fill with this opera pink. Now from here on, just keep observing my brush strokes. I am going little quickly over here because I do not want to run the risk of my paper drying out. Hence I'll be a little quick over here, and now is the time that I start adding my darker clouds. Here I have used the mix of my indigo. If you do not have indigo, you can substitute it with Payne's grey mixed with little bit of your purple or violet. This step is very crucial. If you feel that your paper has dried out, then wait for it to completely dry out and then go ahead, re-wet the areas and then start with this process, or else you might have some nasty hard edges of the clouds which will really look ugly. If you have observed, I have left in between this certain gaps in between those darker clouds so that my lighter shades also show through. This step is necessary because you cannot paint your sky with too much of dark shades. You need the lighter shades also to come out to bring out the balance between the lighter and the darker areas. Now whenever you are going ahead and filling in these darker areas with indigo mix, make sure that your indigo is not too watery, or else you'll run the chance of this bleeding edges of your sky and it might be quite messy. Now this exact same process will be repeating for the lake reflection as well. Now let's quickly jump into our main project. I begin by taping down my paper on all four sides using this carpenter's tape or masking tape. Now once it's fixed, I will be sketching out my horizon line, which I am going ahead and creating, leaving the 3/4 of the paper, which is to be the sky, and the remaining will be our foreground. I'll be quickly sketching out the background elements. Okay, we are done with the sketching. Now let's begin our process of painting the sky. I will be going here with wet on wet technique, layering the paper with ample amount of water, but also making sure that there are no pools or puddles of water standing at any point or corners in the paper. I'll make sure that I go with to and fro motion of the brush, gently spreading across the water evenly on the paper. Okay, once done coating your paper evenly with water, now it's time to prepare your color mix. Ideally, you should do it before you go ahead and lay the flat wash on your paper. But here I am going ahead and mixing my coral orange, which we have already seen in the color section, and right at the center of the sky, I'm going ahead with just the tip of my brush creating the cloud patterns over there. Now with some of that bright rose with long slanted strokes, I am going to fill the areas something like this, as you can observe. Mixing my bright rose with this purple to create beautiful bright violet color, and I'm going and filling the rest of the areas, making sure that I use different tonal values of the colors. While filling the colors at the topmost part of the sky, I made sure that I retained some of those whiter spaces in between, and with a very light tip of my mop brush, I gently dragged the yellows into the center, but retaining the maximum whiteness that I could at the center. Now towards the base, I'm going with the mixture of my bright rose mixed with a little bit of coral orange and yellow over here, and I'm going to go with the gradient blend over here, meaning I go with intense tones at the bottom. While I move upward to the paper, the intensity reduces. When the paper is wet, the color automatically blends well together. If you feel that your paper is drying out, please go ahead and use another layering of water before you start out this process. Towards the base, it's more of the orangish hue because we are painting a sunset, and as I move upwards to the paper, I'm getting in more of those pinkish orange hues. And here I can feel that my paper is drying out a bit, so towards the top I go with my mop brush, layering the water once again before I go with the intense dark tones of purple. With just the tip of my brush and very light gentle movements, I create this fluffy cloud-like shapes, retaining the lighter areas in between. As I move towards the base or the horizon line, I go with little medium tonal values of this purple mix that I have created. Now we'll move to the left corner of a sky which is currently empty, and with very light tonal value of this bright violet, I'm gently going to fill in. To add in both depth and drama to the sky, I will start going ahead and creating the same cloud patterns onto the right side of the paper, ensuring that I do not fill the lighter areas of the sky completely. Make sure that you are going ahead with a selection of analogous colors when you are doing this step, because you don't want your yellows and violets to mix up and form a very dirty muddy brown. So make sure that you are layering analogous colors mixtures. Choose your colors wisely. Pretty happy with how the sky has turned out, so we will quickly get started with the same sky reflection getting reflected in the lake water. I will here go with the same approach of wet on wet. Starting to fill colors from the right bottom of the paper. Here look at the strokes that I'm using, kind of semi half C over here. Using the same concept, that is, I start with the intense tone, and as I move towards the horizon line, I lighten it out over there. That is because at this right side we are going to paint the same reflection of the foliage which is there above the horizon line, right? So we are going to do later. First let us complete the sky. Quickly layering the shades of my coral orange near to the horizon line because I do not want these areas to get dry up soon. and there also same concept, intense at the base of the horizon and then lighten it out. And hereby I am filling with the areas with the brighter colors. So this is the balance that you have to strike between the light and the dark colors. Adding in the darker tones of purple mixed with a little bit of indigo to replicate the clouds which we have painted for our sky. Here at this step, be careful that your paper should not start drying out. If so, then take your time, let your paper dry out completely, or use your hair dryer, dry out the areas completely. Then again rewet the paper and start with the cloud section. Once you are done with the reflection sky, time to move on to the next part of the process, which is creating our thunder. For this, I am going to use my liner brush. This is size number 2 that I am using, and little bit of white gouache. Instead of white gouache, you could also go with white watercolor paint. I would recommend you to go with titanium white watercolor paint instead of Chinese white, the latter being a transparent white pigment. Going ahead with another layer of my thick consistency of white gouache to create that glowing effect of the thunder. Okay, and try to create this thunder with a very nice sharp pointed tip of your round brush or your liner brush. The thinner the lines, the more prettier the thunder is going to look and more realistic too. Here, when I talk about the wetness of my paper, when I'm painting the thunder, the paper is not fully dried yet. It is still about to dry, so there is some kind of wetness in my paper, allowing the thunder to be little blended into the sky as well. Now I am starting the same process for the part of the sky which is reflected in the lake water. Here too I am going to replicate the same thunder. So just use the same consistency of your white gouache. Do not use too runny or too watery gouache here, because if your paper has not completely dried out yet, you will risk the chance of messing up the reflections. My water reflection is done. Now it's time to move on to the foreground or the background element over here, which will be our shrubs. So the sky above the horizon line has dried completely, so I am good to go and start with painting this shrubby areas. For this I'm going to use my sap green mixture. The technique that I'm using here is known as the wet on dry technique. As you can see, the paper here was dry. I'm just going ahead and using my wet paint to fill up the areas over here. The same for the reflection. I'm just going to replicate this sap green mixture for the lake reflection part. Right now the shrub areas are looking very flat, right? So what do? We add in a different tonal value of green, that is a darker shade of green, to add that depth which is missing over here. I mix indigo with my sap green and create this darker mix, and just with the dabbing motion of my size number 4 synthetic brush of silver black velvet, I'm going ahead and creating this shrubby patterns over here. If you observe, I'm going with very random and shorter and longer strokes for the shrubby areas. Do not go with very symmetrical line of the shrubs, they will not look natural. So to keep it natural, go with irregular patterns or random patterns of this shrubby foliage. Filling in the rest of the areas with the same darker mix, but allowing some of that lighter green to show through. Time to go ahead and start with the reflection, the foliage reflection in the water. Observe, here I am pre-wetting the paper a bit using my mop brush. You have to be very soft-handedly wetting the area and gently pull down the darker mix of sap green. First I will go with a lighter coat of sap green and then start adding depth to it by going ahead and adding the darker greens into it. Once done with adding the depth of the foliage reflection, now with a very damp tip of my mop brush, I'm going ahead and dragging those greens into horizontal lines, longer and shorter horizontal lines, to denote that ripply movement in the water. We will wait for the entire painting to dry out completely, then we will start by taking the masking tapes off and we will be done. My paper has dried out completely. I had left the painting for about 40 minutes for it to dry naturally. If you do not want to wait that long, you could use your hot air gun or your hair dryer to dry it out. Once done, rip off the masking tapes very carefully, and that's all. Thank you for watching, and I hope you guys try it out, and do let us know in the comments below where are your difficulties. We would like to answer them, and if you are uploading your creations on social media, don't forget to tag us. That's all for today. We'll see you soon again. Bye bye.